Hi everybody, just thought I would give a quick video on how to think about summarizing unannounced topics. Okay, so Plato wrote another text called the Phaedrus. Yes, it is the same Phaedrus that you meet in the Symposium, but this is a text completely dedicated to a conversation solely between Phaedrus and Socrates. The idea in this text is basically that Socrates is teaching Phaedrus how to be a better rhetorician, as well as other things. Suffice to say, this text is not about feet. There you go, right? So if we were to do a search for feet, F-E-E-T, we find up in this corner here, if you look really carefully, you can see way in the upper right-hand corner, 4 references. Great, you've got what you need because you only need 3 for your assignment. So let's just read what Phaedrus says here, in which he mentions feet. I am fortunate in not having my sandals, and as you never have any, remember Socrates always walks around barefoot, I think that we may go along the brook and cool our feet in the water. This is the easiest way, and at midday and in the summer is far from being unpleasant. Okay, again, at this point, your project is just to summarize what's happening at the moment that feet are being mentioned. And clearly, Phaedrus and Socrates are going for a walk. It's a hot day. Socrates doesn't have sandals. Phaedrus is perfectly willing. Well, he doesn't have any either. He's not willing to take them off. He just also is missing them today. So instead of walking on the hot ground, why don't we walk in the stream, the brook, and keep our feet cool while we go for our walk? That's a summary of what's happening. Now we can push it a bit farther and mention that this is something pleasant and pleasurable, because indeed he says this is far from being unpleasant, right? What you can't do in this assignment, at least, is make the claim that because Phaedrus is looking to have a pleasurable bodily experience with Socrates, then he must be gay, right? Like that, I mean, that could be a cool kind of way to go later in the semester. That is an analysis, that is an argument. Right now, we just want to document that it's a hot day, they're barefoot, walking on the hot, whatever, dirt, stone, could be painful, so let's walk in a brook. Matter of fact, and it's going to feel good. There we go. You can also not extrapolate that often people walk in brooks or in any kind of water in order to like hide their scent from people who are chasing after them. Again, I mean, that might not be completely off limits later in the semester. You'd have to know more about this story. Maybe Phaedrus is running away from somebody, and then it's an absolutely appropriate thing to derive. I mean, Phaedrus doesn't say let's walk in the water to run away from people, but if you know that the story began with Phaedrus running away from people, then that might be the case. By the way, that's not what's happening. Phaedrus is not running away from anybody. I'm just giving you some for instances. Because I want you to understand that when I say no, don't do this, I'm not saying like never do it in any circumstance. I'm saying that you have to know the circumstance that allows you to do it when we get to the point in the semester when you should be doing analysis. But right now we cannot say that they're gay because of wanting to have a pleasant feeling on their feet with each other, and we cannot say that they're trying to run away from like the cops or, you know, drug lords or anything like that. Okay, keep it just pretty clean and simple to what you actually see happening in the text. Okay, so if I hit the next one here, Socrates now says, by here a fair resting place full of summer sounds and scents. Here is this lofty and spreading plane tree, and the Agnus cast us high and clustering in the fullest blossom and the greatest fragrance. And the streams which flows beneath the plane tree is deliciously cold to the feet. Judging from the ornaments and images, this must be a spot sacred to Aeschylus and the nymphs. How delightful is the breeze, so very sweet. And there is a sound in the air, shrill. Okay, it's probably enough for now. Okay. Again, we want to just, what's happening here? Okay. Socrates finds a place in nature, maybe even kind of a place like in the woods, because he's talking about a tree. But when you're talking about one tree, it might not really be a wood. It might be like a field with one tree in it. And he thinks it's a good place to maybe take a break. And the reason is because it smells really nice, and there is a stream, okay, flowing beneath this tree that would feel good on the feet. Now, I understand that in the last passage, they just got done talking about how good it would feel to walk in a brook on their feet. How good it would feel on their feet to walk in a brook. Again, we're talking about water and feet, but you don't need to make that connection. Okay, I mean, this was really handed to us on a silver platter. It's really throwing itself at us. But you don't need to make those connections, okay? You just want to say Socrates is happy to have found a place to rest with a nice shade tree and a cool stream where they could dip their feet in and relax. Notice again what you cannot do, but I'm going to do it just so you can see the difference. Okay, full of summer sounds and scents, greatest fragrance, a delightful breeze so sweet. That's probably a sweet smell, not a sweet taste. We often smell the breeze, we don't taste the breeze. You cannot then say that Socrates has stinky feet. Right? He wants to stop here because obviously his feet must smell, and that's why he's obsessing over scents and fragrances and sweet smelling breezes. No. No, 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 no. Not for this assignment. Perhaps later in the semester, when we're doing analysis, we could possibly make the claim that Socrates has stinky toes. But for now, we just want to document what's happening in this scene. Okay? You could, if you wanted to, mention that he decides to relate this scene to an image from mythology, because that is something that's actually happening in the text right now. Okay, next one. Socrates says, at any rate, you will allow that every discourse ought to be a living creature, having a body of its own, and a head and feet. There should be a middle, beginning, and end, adapted to one another and to the whole. Okay, this is not a plot point. I mean, this is kind of the more interesting version. The other ones are just plot points, like, hey, it's hot, let's walk in the water, it'll be cooler. Hey, look, there's a nice field here with a stream, why don't we stop and dip our feet in the water? Here, he's clearly making a metaphor about feet, right? Every discourse ought to be a living creature, having a body and a head and feet. So he is making a metaphor that every discourse is like every speech, okay? Every speech needs to have a body, a head, and feet. And there should be a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, one would think that maybe the head is the beginning, right? Or the head is the head is the beginning, the body is the middle, the feet is the end. Maybe you could do it in reverse. I don't know. Making those decisions might be analysis, because the text isn't directly making those equations for you. You have to make those equations, which means you have to make decisions. But what we can say is it's kind of interesting that Socrates wants to imagine a speech like the human body. That's a cool observation. Say it, right? That's step one of this whole process. That is a summary of this scene. Socrates equating speeches with bodies. Bodies have particular breakdowns, particular subsections. So do speeches. That is a summary of what Socrates just said. And then this last one here, the fourth foot that we have. Yes, that is the true and only way in which any subject can be set forth or treated by rules of art, whether in speaking or writing. But the writers of the present day, at whose feet you have sat, craftily conceal the nature of the soul, which they know quite well. That reminds me, the Phaedrus is actually Socrates' diatribe against the written word. Socrates only believes in oral communication. Right. So if you read this, you can see these kind of poo-pooing writers. But the writers of the present day, at whose feet you have sat, craftily conceal the nature of the soul, which they know quite well. Nor until they adapt our method of reading and writing can we admit that they write by rules of art. Okay. So how is feet functioning here? Again, this is slightly metaphorical. It's not like the first instance where, real feet are going into real brooks, or the second instance where real feet are going into real streams. It's also not as highly metaphorical as the third instance, where there's no foot. I mean, obviously, my speech to you in this video does not have feet. Okay, right? That's purely a metaphor. Here, it kind of balances between the two. When you say you sat at somebody's feet, I mean, it could be a literal instance. I could actually sit on the ground while somebody else is sitting in a chair, and I am sitting at that person's feet. We can also use it metaphorically, where I've never sat at anybody's feet in the real world, but because I really admire, Donald Trump, then I sit at his feet, right? So 7 years from now, when people watch this video, they'll go, Donald Trump, that was kind of the au courant person of the day back in 2015. Anyways, Lord knows who he will be in 2025 when this video is still being watched. Anyway, I may metaphorically sit at somebody's feet, or I may literally sit at somebody's feet. And you could put that into your summary. You could actually walk through kind of what I just did. Like, the first instance was highly literal. The second instance was also quite literal. The third instance was very, very, very metaphorical. Obviously, speeches don't really have feet. And then this fourth instance is kind of a hybrid between, possibly very literal and maybe also just metaphorical. The idea here, though, the summary of what's being said is, don't worship these people as much as you do, right? That's not an analysis. This is what Socrates is saying, right? But the writers of the present day, at whose feet you have sat, craftily conceal the nature of the soul. Look, if you're concealing the nature of your soul, that's not good. I think we can all agree that concealing your soul is probably a bad thing. Again, probably not analysis. I think that's a pretty universal, like, most people that would read that would agree. Concealing your soul is a bad thing. Therefore, if you are sitting at the feet of someone who is craftily concealing the nature of the soul, that's a bad thing to be doing. All right? I want you to notice that this is kind of the sweet spot example of what you really want for this project. The beginning ones are so flat out literal. They're so plot driven. There's really nothing to say. Hey, let's walk in the water because it's a hot day. Done. Finished. The end. I mean, that unpleasant statement, like, it won't be unpleasant, that might give you a little bit to chew on. Then the highly metaphorical one is just so far out there, it almost shuts it down again. Like, speeches don't really have bodies, so you can't really take it too far, right? But this is actually something that you could write a quite meaty paragraph on, explaining what Socrates is getting at and how he's using feet to do it, right? I mean, you can also say that, feet being the lowest part of the body, feet being the part of the body that actually come in contact with, the grimiest and grossest parts of the world, right? I mean, you really don't want to touch the bottom of your shoe. And if you do, stop doing that. So, like, feet are gross, and if you're going to put yourself at somebody's feet, you're really kind of degrading yourself in the process. Now, again, maybe that's analysis. That could be flirting with analysis. But there is, when you sit at somebody's feet, there is kind of an implicit subjugation going on. And I don't think that that is analysis at all. I think that's quite true to the metaphor of sitting at somebody's feet. Now, if you want to point out that feet are the things that are constantly in contact with the ground and therefore come in contact with Lord knows what's on the ground, like spit, dog poopy, whatever, dead bugs, continue on your list. That might be analysis, but it is awfully gosh darn true at the same time. So that's kind of a wiggle room. Maybe that's summary, maybe that's analysis. I guess when we're in doubt for this assignment, don't do it. Save it for the analysis assignment that's coming later. I hope this was possibly helpful and might guide you in this project that you're trying to complete. Good luck.